sort of a little, thanks, Jack. So, they do provide a little kind of reflection reminder that we'll use as a basis, but we'll do just wait another minute to see who comes. Then we'll just do intros and then talk about sort of our impressions of this unit. Because there's sort of the learning piece, and then there's like the meta thing of like, what do we think about this thing? And where does this fit? So we'll kind of go from our impressions and experience of this, but then sort of, get at like, where does this belong? Who needs this? How is this kind of, training or information like useful as individuals, as teams, but also like in terms of developing a community of volunteers that are sort of all variously networked in this work to support immigrants to the region. So that is all thoughts on that are very much welcome. All right. I know I said Jeff is not coming tonight because he has double conflicts. We're good. Hi, Alex. And Sylvia, are you there? I know a lot of times people keep their screens off because of bandwidth, but or eating or other important reasons. Okay. Hi, Sylvia. Sylvia, have you been able to get through this portion of the module?
I haven't even looked at it.
I love the honesty of that. Hold on, let me find. So I'll have some prompts that I'll get into more specifics.
I'm sorry, I was absent there for a couple of minutes. I gotta
call you out. I had no idea.
And I knew all y'all, so I said they'll be okay for a minute.
Hey, and Juliette, how about you? Have you been able to get through this portion of the module, the key mindsets?
I haven't been able to read it yet. I know I'm a remiss. I've had COVID, so that's my excuse.
Oh my God, that's awful. I'm so sorry. It's still so yucky, although it doesn't feel as like terrifying, I hope.
Yeah, no, it's my second time having it, but between having visitors and having COVID, my visitors brought the COVID. I've just been kind of maxed out here.
Amazing. And also, yes, I got it at Christmas from relatives also last year. I do want to delay as I'm just wait like a tiny bit more because there's another person I think might come. I want to delight you all with like what does that bureaucrat do all day, while we're actually like doing the frontline work of supporting refugees and asylum seekers. I ended my day with two amazing things that may or may not go anywhere. One is, as we're trying to help support people apply to jobs, some of which they do with volunteers. There's a lot of people involved in this, but we kind of zero on some specific people who have extra needs or trying to get people into workplaces where we haven't made progress yet. We realize that, and I do sometimes these webinars about employment law stuff as it relates to refugees. And so I had the chance to call the Department of Justice today because I was like, I really want some people to be able to get some of the seasonal jobs at UPS, and they also may have some open and real positions. Those are great pathways for people. As a national employer, they employ a lot of new Americans. And their online portal requires that you finish with a social security number. And like that is it's a gray area, but it's not a great practice because there's no reason anyway. So that's what was great was they were like at the Department of Justice, they said, it is a gray area, but we have relationships with UPS. So let me call you tomorrow. And I was like, great. If someone could even show me how I can do a thing with a piece of paper that doesn't require that to hit submit, we will make this happen. So that's sometimes when people are like, what does employment support mean? Like sometimes it's like that, just trying to figure out like, what's the barrier to this really good job that's here that has to be resolved like that. So there you go. That's what the bureaucrats do all day. We're not directly helping people. And also my boss has been having conversations with the Department of Labor, which has been paying for here and in Rutland and in Burlington, kind of bulk paying, not through WIOA, for people's driver's ed in a lot of cases. And so there's like a class that runs here at the MCC that's gone down to pause, and we were trying to figure out why. And so one of the things that we're doing is making sure that the Department of Labor understands how critical that is, and it actually needs to also be in Bennington and the Upper Valley. We need more of it, not less of it. So that also is going well. The DOL seems to agree with that, but no action item there. But in the end, when people stay here, and dollars are short for a lot of these driver's ed can cost, depending on the person's level of learning, between $2,000 and $5,000, or it can be $300 or $400 if they already know how to drive. But it makes a big dent in people's ability to get up and running. So there you go. All right, this is great. I want to start with basic introductions. Again, I know folks mostly know each other at this point, but just to make sure, and I'm Jen Stromson from BDCC, which is the Regional Development Corporation down here in the corner, the Brattleboro corner of Vermont, and we do economic development in general. And the next person that I see is Jack. He may have gone to get a sandwich, which I hope he did.
No, I'm here. I'm here. Sorry.
I'm sorry.
Trying to get my headphones connected, but it's not working, so that's fine. Hi everybody. I work with Jen at the BDCC, just helping facilitate all this stuff, and I'm happy to see y'all again, all y'all smiling faces. So yeah, I will pass it along to whoever is next.
I see Vivian next in my.
Hi, I'm Vivian Dolkart. I'm a volunteer on the core team of SHARE.
Awesome. William.
Hi, I'm Bill Plug, and I'm a volunteer on the core team of SHARE.
Great. Sylvia.
Tell us where that is. Those of us who don't know.
Oh,
about SHARE.
that's in the Upper Connecticut Valley. It's in Lebanon, Hanover. It's the whole Upper Valley of New Hampshire and Vermont.
And I'm Sylvia Spita, and I'm a follower of Bill's. I'm in Hanover.
Amazing. Martha.
Martha Tecca, and I'm with SHARE also. I'm part of the core team and have been working before connecting with these guys with the Upper Valley Neighborhood Support Team on the New Hampshire side, more on the New Hampshire side. That's when Sylvia was initially involved with the first Afghan woman to come to the Upper Valley. And I've been working with Jen and Jeff and others to help make this happen. And I just have to say one of the challenges that we have in the Upper Valley, part of the reason I think we are less connected than we might be with one another is not having that coordinating, organizing support to just set up the Zoom meetings and figure out when everyone's going to be there and send out the emails. And we do a lot of that, but not enough. And so I'm really grateful for this administrative support, which is really important to having this conversation happen. So thank you, guys.
Well, thanks back. Yeah. Juliet.
So I should have come after Alix. I have been working with Alix at Carry Me Home, which I'll let Alix explain because she's the boss of that. She's my neighbor in Dummerston, just north of Brattleboro. And through working at Carry Me Home about a year and a half ago, I got to meet Masood and Tofa, who were a young Afghan family who did not have a support group. So I kind of impromptu started helping them and did absolutely everything wrong. And as a result of doing everything wrong, realized I needed to learn how to really actually help people and not just, make life worse for them by my well-meaning efforts. So then I officially kind of got involved with ECDC and started doing some trainings. And then Masood and Tofa and Amir Hamza moved to Sacramento. So then I was deployed to a new family, Aisha Mariam, because I speak French. I'm now part of a French-speaking team that supports her and her two daughters. And now I'm hoping to move and start working with some of the other African refugees who've come to the area. And my personal thing that I always say is that I grew up in New York City in a very diverse community and neighborhood. And I'm just really happy to see some greater diversity happening in Southern Vermont, because I am getting really sick of just knowing old white folks, of which I am one. So I'm really happy to see all these folks moving into the area.
I never tire hearing of any of those things. Is that I'm just gonna say it's so helpful for people to talk about their journey, that honestly, and also yes, thank you. And yes, not last but not least, Alix.
Yeah, so I wear multiple hats. Let's see, 3 or 4 years ago, I joined a team for a circle of support for an asylum seeker that was being supported through the Community Asylum Seekers program. So I definitely learned a couple sort of lessons about local resettlement, even, through that. And then I also was volunteering for and ended up being the director of Carry Me Home, which started out collecting clothes and shipping them to refugee camps. And then in the winter of 2021, when we got all those Afghans, we converted it into a free shop for clothing and footwear and a few other things. It's super fun because we get to meet so many of the families and so many of the people, and it's just a very positive interaction. And we're in the same place with the food pantry. So even if they don't need clothes, they come for the food, and then we catch them and make them say hello. And it's just fun. I also am a founding member of the St. Michael's Episcopal Church refugee ministry, which over the last couple years co-sponsored officially, I think, at least 4 families, and unofficially quite a few more, and got a chance to see what weekly Zoom meetings with your whole team do for all that learning from each other that happens, and thinking out loud about the difficult issues. So yeah, most of what I'm seeing in our training so far is definitely issues that have already come up, and it's really nice to review them and then be able to think about it more. I have also been on one co-sponsorship team individually with ECDC, and I have volunteered for their sewing program and just have various friendships going on. And I do have a background of having been in the Peace Corps in Niger, where pretty much everybody's Muslim. So I had a good sort of view of what one country's version of everybody being Muslim looks like, which certainly helps me when I'm approaching the Afghans, even though there's many differences as well. And of course, I love hanging out with the Africans because they're my people.
So great. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I know that at least a couple of people here have not been able to do this module yet. So if it's okay, I'm just going to take a minute to run through it, because none of this is going to be like rocket surgery, but it's just sort of a good framing. So I'm going to do it with there are these summaries. So I'm going to share my screen. Let's hope I choose the right screen today. And the gist of this is this ABCDs. And so the A, and this is, sort of our mindsets, right? So how we approach the work. So the A is remaining adaptive and curious. And then it gets into a little bit of what that means. And I do want to say, not to drag last week's conversation too much into this, but I really, we really focus a lot on this cultural humility term that just resonated for a lot of us. And yeah, so, and then the next one, B, is benevolent, being compassionate and trauma informed. And I love that it starts with have compassion for yourself. I think that's such a big part of this. This is a journey of personal as well as cultural humility in many ways. And I think folks are really sensitive to trauma, but I do think that we continue to all struggle with, what is the power and privilege here? And I think that's, we deal with this all the time with employment, just thinking about like, how do we set priorities? How do we allocate scarce resources or attention? How do we try to achieve equity where there's not, parity? And so, I think this is somewhat less of an issue within a single team, or if you're working with one family. But I think when you start to work with multiple families, and also in the conversation about co-sponsorship, this question, I think Alix, you spoke to this recently, of just like, the question of families that don't get a co-sponsor, and what are the sort of the, you know, the equity issues here, and what kind of, you know, how do we share the power and privilege that we have, right? And what are the mechanisms to do that? And co-sponsorship is certainly one of the ways that we help empower people in their communities and sort of privilege them and help them build connections. Yeah, Martha, sorry.
Just before you go away there, because you said sort of quickly this notion that it may not be as big a deal if you have one sponsorship team or one family, but certainly it becomes an issue looking across families, across folks who have different opportunities. But I would say, in fact, we had some of the most significant challenges in this area in dealing with individuals on the same team, or a range of volunteers, in terms of, you know, differing judgments about how people were taking care of their children, you know, like on a day-to-day basis. They may think about their peers similarly, you know, in different ways about how they deal with their kids, but sort of thinking through as a group without necessarily having the training about managing the group process in the same way, or just experience. Different people on the team had different experiences in kind of self-directed work teams, if you will, where people have different ideas. But I just think this piece about the compassion for ourselves, for one another, and sort of that shifting the power and privilege mindset is, I think, it felt very, very powerful, even among just a few people trying to solve the same problem, you know, working with the same people.
Yeah. It's truly, you zeroed in on the thing that I think I often have the most. I have to spend a lot of time, like, just with volunteers, trying to bridge a disconnect between like what my approach is, or our approach or expectations are, and what they would prefer, you know, and spend time on it together, you know, to understand where they're coming from versus where we're coming from. And it just takes time, right? And listening. So because we're not doing the best thing, we're doing the thing that's doable, you know. So all right, C is collaborating both with your folks, your team, and your new friends. I really appreciate the connection between the need for collaboration and dealing with burnout. And this is for me the impetus for me very much behind the work that Jeff and Martha and others, you know, we've been doing to try to figure out how to expand what is there to support or build some kind of more formalized volunteer network, because I'm so concerned about the burnout. And I want the volunteer community to be a renewable resource, not like just bringing in fresh cannon fodder, like, you know, with everybody to figure out how to renew their energy. So
I would love to hear others' thoughts or reactions to this, whether you feel like you have a ton of experience or you know, not yet experience with the newcomers. I just love to hear how this, because I found when I was learning this, when I was reading this section, it certainly applied to my life as a new settler, welcomer, but it also applied to a whole lot of other elements of my life. I was just curious if anybody else is had thoughts or reactions to this.
leap in. We're small enough that you don't have to be polite.
Okay, so yeah, my group with my current African widow mom and 2 daughters has really struggled with like the right thing to do. What is too much help? What is enabling? What is not enough help? And we have been taken to task by the 2 African women on our team for being too white saviory and enabling. And those are really helpful, important conversations that my team has had to go through. And you know, our woman, our mom has had trauma, and there's also all kinds of weird class things that are really hard to understand. our mom comes from a very wealthy family and grew up with servants, but only has like a 5th grade education. So there's just this whole complicated mixture that we're dealing with. And, you know, it's hard to know what the right thing to do is to launch this family in this country. And, you know, I'm particularly concerned about the 12-year-old daughter being handed too much responsibility. I'm the child of an alcoholic and I grew up too young. So I don't want to see this girl have to do that. And yet so many immigrant children end up in the role of being the person who speaks English when their parents don't, translating documents, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, it's just a constant and never-ending conversation.
What do you mean by enabling? I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
That's like Al-Anon language. Helping someone in a way that actually undermines their sense of agency and adulthood and independence in a way that makes them dependent on you in an unhealthy relationship. So, you know, I said I made a terrible mistake with my Afghan family, my first family. I lent them $3,000 to buy a car. Now, as it turns out, the Good News Garage in Burlington was just about to give them a free car, but by me giving them the money to buy a car, which they then went ahead and bought, they were now ineligible for the free car, which was actually a better car than the crappy secondhand car. And like, it just turned into this huge mess. And they ended up selling the car they had just bought at a huge loss, which meant I never got paid back. And, you know, and here I was trying to help. And had I stood back and like asked a few more questions and recognized that there might be bigger efforts at work, I might have, you know, saved everybody a lot of hassle, and they still would have gotten the car that they ultimately got, which was the free car from the Good News Garage.
So were you acting out a white savior role? Is it appropriate to say that?
In that particular case, I don't know if I was a white savior or just a savior. I was just, because they were fairly white too, but you know, they saw me as, you know, like the benevolent auntie. You know, I was the age of their moms. The husband and wife were in their 20s. Yeah. I was like you know, I have kids in their 20s. They were the age of my kids. Really? So I was being just very overly, you know, helpful.
Well, but I love that question, because also like one of the things I keep the characteristics of white supremacy culture, not like, you know, like in terms of like organizational stuff, like, you know, bureaucracies and behaviors, because I think that in terms of like diagnosing sometimes like things that seem perfectly normal and are in fact signs of like high performance and excellence, right, in the world that, you know, many of us grew up in and were educated and have worked in, are kind of on that continuum of a little bit about that white saviorism, you know. And so the sense of urgency that, you know, this action oriented, or the perfectionism, there are all these characteristics that are, you know, beautifully described nowadays in some of the, you know, that material around white supremacy culture, that they're not inherently negative, right? Like being punctual isn't negative, but our obsession with that as a signal of virtue or value is where it becomes, you know, a question. And so I think it's all of these characteristics are like this. It's not that we're doing something wrong, it's the context, right? It's like, listen, when I buy a bottle of, you know, like scotch for a friend, that's not enabling unless they're, you know, an alcoholic who's trying not to drink, you know. And so, or whatever. I mean, that's just being sabotaging, whatever. But I mean, it has to do with context and the questioning, right? It's the struggle is the point. And the discussion is the point, right? Where it's okay to be who we are. I'm going to go on, just do D, just, you know, because completionism is also dedicated, which is you're here. So, remaining dedicated and resilient when facing unexpected. High tolerance for the unexpected. I feel like we could spend an entire evening telling great stories about whoo, never saw that coming, in good ways and bad. And selfishly, I think, I'd like that this is where they kind of, land thinking about the larger resettlement goals, right? Part of the point of Key Mindsets is to take us through this journey and have us really think about how we're navigating it and how it's impacting us, but also how we're present in this work. But tying it back to, right, the larger goals of self-sufficiency. So yeah, that about sums it up.
Can I ask something here about this? I hadn't sort of this piece about dedication. I was feeling like overly dedicated, when I first went through this the first time. So I was like, check. I just sort of went through this, but I find myself, I'm being a little judgy about people who have gotten into this work. And, as much as we try to explain that it's going to be super hard work and, we don't necessarily know what's going on, people make a commitment. And then, there is this stuff we talked about before of self-compassion that people are like, oh, geez, way harder than I thought. I'm out of here. And there's sort of an increase. That's not just in refugee settlement work, but that's in volunteerism. It's one of the challenges that, we're seeing more broadly. But I am wondering about whether these, there's that first bullet, it requires commitment and follow through, but maybe there's a really important piece of trying to help people keep their commitment by helping them manage what their next steps might be. So they don't have to feel like, I committed to, whatever it might be, making sure that the person got their asylum, or whatever it is. It may be that we have to give them some appropriate next steps, but helping, it does feel important to that people on our teams are able to stay and follow through. And at the same time, what does that, I'm just laying it out there. You can tell I'm impatient, but trying to figure out what do we do with that? How do we help keep our teams more solid? Because, when people fall away, it actually does it makes it harder for those people who are still in the group to, sustain. So I'm just curious if anybody else has.
Yeah, and I also want to pair with a question, part of my operating theory is that more knowledge ahead of time and more support along the way, can help either people filter themselves, self-screen, but also be more prepared, but that's, I don't know I don't know if you all feel that that's true. I mean, again, the point of this whole kind of a training is it's a required thing that Welcome Corps requires of people doing co-sponsorship. But I think our operating theory, right? Martha, you, me and Jeff, and, is that this can really help people. This can help people give themselves permission to develop boundaries and to contextualize their work or whatever, and actually make it a better experience.
My thought is that, as physically hard and time consuming as this work is, the thing that makes people really burn out and leave is the emotional exhaustion that can come with being frustrated or disappointed or confused or even angry or whatever. So things like, both Julia and I have been through having people that we were close to quit their jobs for reasons that we don't understand or agree with. And if we get all upset about that, because it's something that we can't control, and then 6 other things happen in that vein, maybe we're just going to be really tired of working with that family and just say, I can't do this, this job is just too much. And so I think this whole mindset unit that we're doing, I think, is a good beginning of having maybe some attitudes that will help us process negative things that are happening in a way that's more constructive, because maybe we understand better what's going on and what's us and what's them.
Right, and I guess that's super helpful, and it is also, again, I come back to this, the different characteristics of different volunteers, and there'd be some volunteers that'd be perfect on one team and really not be a little too oil and watery with,
Yeah.
with another situation.
There are
You know,
people that I've worked with that I really hope they don't come back, because I'm
Well,
having trouble
there's that,
imagining which
yeah.
team they would be good on.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Sylvia,
Right.
you were
But
trying
there
to
probably
chime
would
in?
be a team they would be good
Yeah.
on. I just haven't imagined it yet.
I was thinking as I was hearing you talk, for example, being at the stage of my life where I am with the commitments that I have and whatever, one thing that I would really like when I join a team officially, right, is to have really clear expectations. Like, I want to know this is what I'm taking on, to the extent that that's possible, right? This is what you're taking on for this length of time. And then I could say, yes, I can do it. Or I could say, no, I can't commit to that. I think for me, that would be very calming about the whole situation. Just knowing what it is that I'm committing to. And I know that the group leaders really, maybe ahead of time, don't know, right, what's going to happen, and because it's all a movable piece. But I think just having, little square, this is my thing.
Yep.
You do another thing, you do another thing, you do another thing. And then I think it would work as a team. But if stuff is being sprung on you all the time, I think that I would burn out very quickly.
Can
Yeah.
I
Thank
want
you,
to
Juliet. Sorry.
Yeah, I want to just sort of counter what you just said. I love to know what I'm supposed to do so I can do an excellent job and be like the best person to do that job that I can possibly be. And I find with this work in particular, it's so much like being a parent. I don't know if you have kids, but it's like there is no clear path from point A to point B sometimes. And so I feel like this is this huge Zen exercise, just like being a parent. It's just being comfortable in the not knowing and recognizing that you think you're doing this thing, but in fact, what's required is this completely other thing. And I totally relate to that desire to have a really clear-cut task, and having been both the leader of a team and, part of a team, I know how hard it is as a leader to kind of give everyone a very specific task, because it's just never, even if the specific task is like, pick this person up at point A and drive them to point B. Well, then that, the volunteer may show up at point A and the person's not there. And then they have to find the person, and, then the job becomes something different. So I feel like that whole, I can't remember what the card said, but something about being flexible is, sadly, this is like the part of the advertisement for being a refugee volunteer should be people who want like a Zen experience,
Yeah.
of just not at all getting what they thought they were getting.
Well, I'm going to
But
challenge
that
that a
means-
little bit and say, I'm not sure that is the experience that everybody has to have, because I think what you guys are all is you in particular, right, in your team, you've been pioneers in a disorganized space because it's new, right? It's new to all of us. ECDC is new and whatever. And I think, what we're looking at is something that was developed over years and years and years of refinement in a place where, they are, basically defining ahead a very straightforward set of things. Now, I know that it's not really that straightforward, but it's, you are done after 6 months. Each team member has a very specific job description. And I think that I don't know, I think there's room for both, right? I think based on Alix's description of the different types of teams, there are going to be teams that are going to say, yeah, we'll get all that done, but we'll get it all done together. And there'll be teams where, someone like Sylvia has a very explicit job description and you don't need to know about food and housing. That is just not your problem, and it feels like there's room for everybody. I don't know. I mean,
Yeah, I think it's really helpful for team leaders to be informed and aware of the kind of work styles that the different volunteers prefer, so that, and so going through this process, we each get a chance in this educational element to sort of think about what are going to be the hardest things for us, so that when we do have a leader, we communicate that to them. And, maybe, it's a team that gets 2 families and one of them are completely illiterate and the other ones are like job ready when they get off the airplane. And those families are going to need, one of them is good with 90 days and the other one's going to need 5 years of support. And the team leaders are going to need to be thinking about, there might be some volunteers who want to cycle on and off the team because that's too long of a time commitment for them, and they could not possibly have known ahead of time. So now that we see the situation, let's have some conversations as a team about what modalities and predictabilities work for each person.
Yeah, and I wanted to add that so we're experimenting with having resource teams that are sort of teams of specialists. For example, English language learning. There's no reason why English language learning can't be a more well-defined job for someone. Meeting regularly and talking for a certain amount of time with someone. And also like learning to drive. I mean, you talked about, driver's ed courses, but we've had good luck with the very special people who can teach somebody to drive an automobile. So again, that's a very well-defined job. Some of our medical, we're working on a medical team too that is going to be pretty specialized in identifying resources for individual situations. So I think it can be very messy on a team where everybody is working together. But I think once you move to having maybe, let's call them specialists that work across teams, I think the opportunity for defined jobs becomes easier or more prevalent.
And how does that come back to like this thing of managing expectations and having like a shared understanding of what done is?
Yeah, I'm just going to jump in because I'm kind of helping to those 2 like neatly defined teams. I'm like, whoa, I guess I'm glad it sounds so straightforward for the healthcare team and the English team. I had that thought myself. We're just going to have a list of all the English language learners, and we're going to have programs and the tutors and the online resources. And of course, I mean, literally, we can't even get the one person who says she wants this one English language to like get together with her because she has a headache or then she doesn't like the person. I mean, so it turns out to like what feels like it should be so defined is actually is a trick, but it's also something that comes back to whose responsibility is it that she has English classes, right? And that starts now where, initially it was, we're doing everything possible. Doesn't matter what, we're scrambling to make sure we get that gal to English or English to that gal. And then there's a certain point where we have a perspective that says, wait a minute, we're coming alongside her. If she's not ready, then either she's not going to take English. And if it's critical to us that she takes English because of her goals, right? She's not going to achieve her goals if she doesn't do better in English. We have to work with her to, have her show up, have her respond, what those things are, because those have to be things she wants to do in order to accomplish her needs. Anyway, I got a little off kilter there, but to say that I think there are defined roles, but that person who's going to be like on the English language team might be able to be on the English language team a little bit longer, because it would have less of that emotional intensity that Alix was talking about. That may, you can sort of write off those mini moments of emotional intensity if you're teaching a whole bunch of different folks, right? It's just, or if you're taking care of a bunch of, I don't know. It's a good question though.
Yeah, I think one way to look at it is it's kind of a parallel process between, what everybody's expectations for each other are, and And that goes for both newcomers and for volunteers and for the expectations we have of volunteers, that oftentimes I think, depending on someone's personal situation, they can do a certain amount, or as Sylvia was saying, have a comfort level with, having a well-defined amount. But that can change, and depending on, what people's situation is. So I think for all the things that were listed, it could apply to family members, both old and young. It could apply for volunteers and newcomers, for ourselves. I think the mindset, kind of cuts across all those boundaries. And I also think having the mindset of saying, I think at the first meeting a couple of weeks ago, someone said, I could put a grain of sand in this jar, and then, that's what I could do right now. And then those sort of grains of sand add up. So I think, not to be so vague, but really the mindset applies to everyone involved, as both newcomers, volunteers, people who are trying to rustle up volunteers, everybody.
Yeah, I didn't mean, I think what I meant was, I think it sounded like I just want this and that's that. I didn't mean it to sound like that. It was simply in terms of committing to something, it would be easier to do it if I knew exactly
Oh, yeah.
what I'm getting into. Like
Understood.
that Martha talked about, I understood my job to be take Alyssa to daycare when people couldn't. And so I would jump in and be the person who took her to daycare. But then I ended up doing all sorts of other things. I was teaching the Hishda to drive and whatever. But what I'm saying is I started out with just that, the one thing. And then as I got comfortable with, okay, this is needed, that is needed, I can do it, I would do it. But I think it could be very daunting for somebody who's wanting to join and do something like this, to sort of have a very diffuse field of what the expectation is and of how much time is involved. I think that could be pretty.
Yeah.
I think what you just described prevents burnout, because you're sort of saying, let me start with something I want to do and can do. And I know in my own situation, my family situation has changed so that I don't have a lot of freedom of time. But I also feel that, if here and there I could do this and that is also putting those grains of sand in. So that's something that we can
Exactly.
portray.
A huge help. And honestly, I would just say specifically to that, Vivian, the fact that you aren't, gurgling with your head barely above water all the time related to this gives you some distance so that you're just wise in a way that some of us can't be quite as wise in the middle of it all. You know what I mean? So I that is it's very important point.
Yeah, and just to sort of make to take a step back see it from really like my job perspective, we are constantly involved in this challenge of what is our box, because we have to be realistic about what we can deliver across different, population sustainably. And so it's never simple, and it's constantly changing, the thing that there'll be one day that Amira will come to me and say I know I'm not supposed to blah, 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 but this person needs some extra help. And I'm like, so fine this time, and then, and so we're constantly having to revisit, what does it really mean? Because if someone's in a very different situation, someone who's a single mom here who has never worked in the, before, yeah, actually, we do need to change our definition of what is an acceptable level of employment support to provide someone, right? We're trying to build self-sufficiency, but we're not trying to be punitive, right? So, and that always is done in conversation and dialogue. I mean, he doesn't want to make that decision alone. I don't want him to make it alone. We don't mind arguing about it. That's part of the creativity of this. But then there's also this thing about like, we get together and talk about these things. Every time one of you talks about a specific thing, whether it's people learning to drive or medical stuff or getting cars, I'm like, oh, I can't wait until we get to a place where more people have had more time to learn more about the resources that are out there, right? Because like Juliet, like how would you have known what was happening with Good News Garage? I found out the same, in the accidental way that you did, when I would be like, wait, who got 2 cars? Not even your person, like another family too. And, it happened multiple times because they didn't know it was coming. And then I didn't even realize that it only was for families that had kids. It was only reach up people. And I was like, wait, and that those people up there don't pay any attention to information from down here. So they weren't listening to case managers saying, who really didn't have co-sponsorship help. The families that most needed help getting a car were not the people getting up to the top of the list. It was the people who were the best self-advocates who had co-sponsors, right? So we're sort of all learning about what's going on out there too. So I just think everyone's done a phenomenal job, but I also live, in my fantasy future, I want there to be a world where it's realistic for volunteers to define down their jobs to what's really sustainable for them, because the systems have risen, the road has risen to meet you, right? You don't need to be that involved in housing or school enrollment or, driver's ed stuff, because that has gone further. So that's not a solution right now. You just have to deal with the reality of what's going on. But I hope that, these kind of things meet each other in the middle. Because really, teaching people to drive, I mean,
Yeah. I find it interesting
Gets a
that
lot
you
of
guys
men
are,
involved.
yeah. I find it interesting that you guys are moving towards resource teams, because that's something that ECDC is doing right now as well, because they're realizing they don't have enough volunteers to provide sponsors or even small support circles, family by family. And the resource teams are a way to, capitalize on lessons learned, but it's still a personal touch, because these are all people who have already been doing this work a little while and have a sense of how to be.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
They provide, it's incredible foundation. Like if you as a co-sponsorship team know that food and clothing is covered by Welcome Home, and that there's a resource team that's going to do conversation partners, what the resource teams are doing is building out that ecosystem to make it a more manageable job for co-sponsors. And I think that these things are also going to sort of, meet, I handed Ursula a diagram about a year ago of like that kind of that vision of like the resource teams and the different volunteer things, kind of complementing that, because it felt unsustainable for co-sponsors at that time. But I don't think that's a permanent problem. I think exactly what they're doing and what you guys are developing is going to help give some boundaries to the work of a co-sponsor team.
Yeah, I mean, it's your point about the systems being so whacked. People are like, oh, it must be so horrible because of their culture to like deal with. And I'm like, it is not their culture. It is our system. I'm pretty good in our culture, and I can't figure out what is going on. Like, how do I apply for that? How does he apply for that job? And I speak pretty good English. So I feel like it's just so that what we can do is just, and the other piece of this is in the Upper Valley, again, we're a lot of different communities and a wide range of asylum seekers and, folks who came in the mess of 2021, and some coming through in a more organized way. So we are hitting a wide range of different systems that we're running into, that it really just does. It really makes a difference to have some people just trying to, so everyone's not trying to solve the same problem. We have mental health access issues on every single team. So to get a few people trying to figure out what the mental health resources are, just feed the teams is
it's actually extremely exciting when you're sort of, running one little particular aspect of things, that when people, as they do, bring you an unrelated problem, to be able to say, oh, well, I'm good friends with so-and-so who's in charge with that, because you're collaborating all the time, but you have a great place to refer them to. And so even though you're not doing it yourself, you're able to, through that leverage, really feel like you're helping people, and that kind of adds to the fun of it, as well as, actually getting the work done that we want done.
And not feeling so burned out because you're holding so many problems. Yeah, I'm gonna just put the reflection reminders on the screen. I feel like we're doing a great job of getting at it, but I just want to sort of, this is what they.
And I need to go away from the screen. I'm going to come back, I think, in a little bit, but I have to attend to something here. This has been so useful, every one of these conversations, and I'm so grateful for everybody in the room. Thank you.
Thank you. And we won't go all the way to 6:30. I think we'll wrap up thinking about 15 minutes, if that's okay. I think we've done a great job of going through this stuff, so I don't feel like we'd have to sort of literally go down it. But I do want to, if it's okay, I'm just gonna be quiet for a minute and let you look at this. So if it's okay, I would just love folks to see if there's just any more kind of reflections from a personal place about this. Like, what are you doing now, whether you're entering this work newly or you're staying with it or re-entering it? What are you doing to sort of work on your mindset, to work on increasing your compassion or handling, the stress or anxieties? Hard, right?
Well, I can jump in on this. I mean, so I've been, you'd say, pretty heavily engaged since, I don't know, since 2020. A couple of things that I do when I find myself getting very impatient with a situation or a person, I just sort of, stand back and I acknowledge my impatience. I try to understand why I'm being impatient or maybe even put off, and I practice doing that quite a bit. And that helps, it kind of brings me back to a place where, I might not have a good reason for being really impatient. So that's one thing that I do. And my expectations, they're formed from this experience of being involved. So I hate to say it, I expect things to be difficult. I think I know this is really hard work, and and I acknowledge that. And it's an impossible situation in an impossible environment. So I know that maybe what I do to make myself continue on is that I do periodically back off a bit and do something else. So I take a break. I mean, not a total break, but I might go from like 15, 20 hours down to 5 hours in a certain week. And that can help. And then getting away totally for a week or two also helps.
I do exactly the same thing. And what's been really nice about I'm part of a 3-person leadership team. One of the members of our team broke her collarbone. Another member of the team, has a really busy work and family life. So it's really great to see, like, hey, everybody's busy and not everybody can be on all the time. And so now, I have COVID and I've had my daughter starting at college. So I kind of have been stepping back to deal with that. And it just feels really nice to give yourself a break and be like, these people aren't going to die if you're not spending every second, like, focused on their needs and their problems. Like, it's like I said, it's a lot like being a parent. Just a ton of trust is required, to just trust, like, it's gonna work out, even if I take a week off or a few days off and just miss the meeting and don't learn about the thing that's currently up. And so I agree.
I love that. And when you say trust, I feel like it's that thing of like, it's like, which is like a form of humility too, of like, I'm not that important, right? Like, you know, I am. I'm the most important person in my kid's life, but I'm also not that important, right? They're, you know, well, maybe not the most important person in their life, but at least second. Third. Depends on the day.
But I could add that, well, when the call started, I felt kind of annoyed because I thought, oh, all the volunteers are saying that they want more training, and I'm so glad this is happening, but then they're not here. So then I thought, okay, you know, just manage that expectation and think that I'm grateful that I could catch my breath at 5 o'clock and be here and absorb what I can, so that if there are questions, I could, you know, be more apt to be able to answer them, or, you know, sort of pass things along. So I kind of regroup myself as I sat here, and then just thought, I'm just glad to, you know, be able to be here and that others are here as well.
Amen. Amen. It's like therapy and estate planning. It's like, we all know it's good for us.
Yeah, and there's something really amazing about, you know, Juliet and I and Jen, we're all sort of wrapped up, and Jack, we're wrapped up in our little Brattleboro world, but to know that you guys in the Upper Valley are going through some of the same things that we're going through, and that there's even many more people than we realize in Vermont who are doing this work, is really just reassuring. You know, how many people are really trying hard to help people.
Yeah, it's actually like, it's super exciting. And I had a chance to talk with a guy I met at the ECDC conference this summer, Dave Mammon, who's part of a organization in Jersey City called Welcome Home. No, is that right? It's very similar to it's something, it's close. Anyway, and it started as just a kind of a purely volunteer effort, but has become more formalized. But it is still a community-based organization, which we don't have. We don't have a formal community-based nonprofit right now that's doing refugee work. There is CAS that does asylum seeker work, but and so I've been talking with him, and I at some point I really want him to sort of talk to folks here about their journey, because it is so helpful to see people and to talk with people who have been on or on a parallel journey or different points in it. And I think already so many things he's sort of identified. One of the things Martha talks a lot about is this kind of like struggle between wanting to keep it grassroots and volunteer driven, but at the same time, the need for capacity and to create, you know, systems and sustainability. And so they're a little further along in that journey. And I think that's, you know, trying to make those connections. But I love, especially Vivian, I love what you said about the thing, just like kind of letting go of worrying about what other people are doing and just doing our best, and, you know, creating the resource and trying to lower the barrier to people accessing it, because people have really good reasons for not being able to, you know, do this right now. And that's totally, you know, it's fine. We're all on this journey for hopefully a long time. So the thing I'd love to end. Oh, sorry.
I gotta say goodbye. I have to
Thank
go
you so
right now.
much.
So great. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Yeah, the thing I just want to end on is just like any thoughts that folks have in terms of, you know, who needs this? What's a good way? We don't have to have answers, but just to be thinking about this, and you know, whatever you have to say about what is a good way to get people engaging in this or other trainings. You know, we'll be putting some other stuff forward after I get through this, and also, you know, hopefully seeing other organizations do trainings. I kind of want to, you know, just say, like, we're open to input about how to make this more accessible to your team members or what needs to happen next. It's I don't feel like there's any right way forward, but going forward. So
You know, in the same way that I ended up working with Martha, with although I didn't, you know,
Didn't know she was working with me.
even though I didn't know. In the same way, I've ended up now, I forget, like maybe 10 days ago, somebody in St. Albans brought down a Venezuelan couple to the white church.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and I honestly, I don't know who's organizing this or whatever, but a friend of you are.
Yeah.
And a friend of mine simply says, oh, the guy needs work. And so I've been hiring him and bringing him and taking him. And then it turns out his kids are in Juarez on the street. So figuring out a hotel for those kids so that they're not on the street, all of this stuff. But it occurred to me, this is a person who I go like, what can he do? You know, he's been doing gardening for a lot of people around here, but I go, he has no skills. And how are we going to employ him? I said, and I was thinking to myself, now that the cold is coming and there's no more work in the gardens, he says he can paint and his partner, his wife, can clean houses. But it occurred to me when I read in the paper that all of New England has like the lowest birth rates, it's the most graying population in the country. And we really basically really need immigrants to come, right? Desperately. And I thought it would be fabulous down the road to build like training hubs. Like I'm thinking, you know, at Dartmouth, they have a woodworking shop that is totally fabulous. You go, they teach you everything. They have all the machines. I learned to build a table. You know, so I'm thinking just as a dream down the road or something to keep in mind is that would be useful, say if Norwich, Hanover, Lyme, Lebanon got together, Wilder, and created a hub for the area, right? And you in Burlington did the same thing.
So I'm going to stop you there and say that's like a resource team kind of discussion and important stuff. I hope that you all pursue that dream vigorously. Having first made yourselves aware of what already exists and how the existing workforce systems work, because it's yes.
So Jen, what do we do with somebody?
Well,
Yep. Yes. Well, I would love to have that conversation. And I mean, Martha, I don't know if that's a thing you feel, I think you can handle a lot of this probably.
I think I just want to lift up that as we go into the next section of the, you know, which is like, how do we think about very specific issues in settlement? This one about matching people with jobs is a huge one. And so I just, and also Sylvia, we really, really do need to talk about this, because it's also true that every employer is so desperate for staff that there's training that can happen, that individuals are training people right on site. And my youngest is involved with one of them at the moment. You know, I mean, there are lots of ways to get people who don't initially have skills. So we should let's definitely talk more about that. And Jen, I do think it would be a worthy conversation to explore, because I don't think people are aware of all of the workforce and training supports that are available. Like Dartmouth has this amazing rural health access thing. I don't think people even know about it.
Yeah, I would say that I agree with that. The question is whether so I'll give you an example of sort of a resource group. When we were kind of starting to welcome refugees and doing employment stuff and saying volunteers should support everybody as much as they want to, it's helpful if we know what's going on so that we're not doing redundant things, right? And don't stop. We held kind of a routine resource call for people who were supporting folks with various pieces of employment, so that they could understand what exists and how to plug into those things, and understand that, so that they weren't trying to reinvent the wheel, and also so they could understand what we could do, or also give us referrals for specific things that we could take on. And that kind of coordination with the actual Workforce Development Network is the sort of thing that I think so we've been talking a lot about coordinating, about getting right with ourselves, coordinating as teams, networking as volunteers. Then there's this other thing of the context in which you operate right? Especially you guys up there, because you have both Vermont and New Hampshire, is complex, right? And there's a series of networks, whether it's health networks or, you know, benefit providers, food stamps and housing, whatever, or whether it's workforce stuff. And it's really important that as you get deeply into supporting people, that you understand where you end and those things begin, or where there are just gaps that have to be addressed or that you just can't address, right? Sometimes, for instance, we come up against a thing in this, we're just like, you just simply won't be able to do that career here. You know, we don't have the job and we don't have the training. And so much as we want you to stay here, we think it's in your best interest not to be here, you know, and that's okay. And so this is a much bigger conversation, but I think just to bring it back to sort of thinking about like how we think about this stuff, it's hubris to think that you alone can solve anything simpler than getting someone, you know, to and from a doctor's appointment, or, you know, whatever your task is as a volunteer. And yet when you start dreaming, which you ought to do, because these are people who deserve, right, to have dreams and to have us dream with them and for them. And, you know, it can get really frustrating, and it can also lead to a lot of energy spent and not getting a lot of places. So it's really figuring out how to create those conversations, those networks it's just really important. So part of that is, I just want to say, I can't answer for the Upper Valley any of the things you're talking about. And a lot of the folks here, you know, your teams probably have information that we don't have. And I know that's.
And the one other layer of complexity in this particular case is this is a early asylum seeker. So we're actually not, you know, the how we help him find work opportunities that are cash work opportunity. You know what I mean? That whole thing is its own level of complexity around what we're, you know, what is the right and right enough thing for us to be doing as an organization.
Absolutely. And I think we struggle with this obviously because we have an official position we have to take. And I think one of the great things, one of the many, many benefits of volunteer support is that you aren't constrained in the way that I am constrained, right? I, doing employment services, can't say, hey, take some work under the table, you know, and you can, and by the way, you should, you know, because people need to do what they need to do. And so that's also, you know, that's just an acknowledged problem that we have as far as employment support. Like we really can't, we do quietly, we can't officially say to people the best way to augment your income is to, you know, go babysit under the table or do yard work, whatever. But there is a bigger important question also about identifying where people with different statuses or whatever are able to plug into programs. And so that's that only your service providers can help you navigate that, right? Like only your service providers can tell you whether he's allowed to enroll in the community college. Will any of the scholarships apply to him? Like, so for instance, we were able to find money for someone before they got their asylum status to do courses at the community college, but it was private scholarship money because none of the public, right, works. So there are things he could be doing to progress and learn while maybe having to earn illegally. And all that has to be sort of figured out with the kinds of folks who do, you know, scholarship and enrollment and whatever. So you can start to build that pathway with shingling the stuff that's like legit and less legit. So.
And I think when you're beginning to approach these questions, of course, you don't even know what questions to ask. You don't know to look and see if there is a BDCC analog in your town or whether there is a Good News Garage program or any of those things. And it's like the only substitute for having already been in these circles where people talk about stuff and you have an idea of who you can ask is to eventually have these sort of resource teams build out where there are people who do know what questions you should be asking as well as knowing some of the answers.
Yeah, that's so helpful.
Right.
That is kind of the vision for, I think, what we're trying to do up with Share is just like have enough visibility that if some wacky thing comes up, someone at least knows to give us a call and we can do our best with the connections we do have. And that's kind of what's happened in this second case that, you know, Sylvia, that you're involved with. It like totally randomly came to us because someone's like, oh, Martha probably can help here. And then we made a bunch of connections. We're still trying to figure out how formally Share can be involved because we don't know whether we can support these guys over a long time, but a bunch of us are helping. I didn't know even that you were in the mix, but a bunch of people, I knew there were a bunch of people helping on the work front. So anyway, we do need to talk more, and it is just this, again, I think underscoring this huge value of just the networking. This piece is so dang helpful.
Yeah, and just keep asking around, because I'll tell you, I mean, most restaurants that are not corporate are paying some of their kitchen staff under the table, and that's the only way to stay fully staffed. For instance, there are winter jobs out there for people who are working under the table. It's it takes some digging around, because everyone's obviously careful about not getting caught. So
That's it.
all right, I'm going to wrap us up if that's okay. And you will receive your next instructions. So
And do your homework.
do your homework. I really do think that PDF, is a good, if you don't like the online module, reading through that longer PDF, if that's more your learning style, it's great. Like, it's, we're all different. But we'll send out that, and then we hope more soon.
So Jen, in this, can we all of us that are here that think this is, helpful in some ways, and I know we've sort of like leaned into this being great for us, but thinking about the people that we know, they don't have to have been through these first 2 sessions necessarily. If it would be helpful to have a great conversation about employment, or a great conversation about English, or whatever that, what does an intake need to look like? How do we come together to think about what an intake would look like for us? I think it would be really useful before the next group conversation to get as much input from any individuals who are interested at all, to just say, if we're talking about the nitty gritty of settlement, which is what the next section is, like, what do you want to learn more about? What do you have questions about? And just get as many questions on the table as we could.
Sure.
And so just to, again, I think if all of us can reach out, Jen and Jack, you're doing an amazing job of sending out the emails, but I think it would help us also to just have some direct contact with folks and say, hey gang, this is happening. It's a chance to talk about it. What matters most? Can we do that?
Yeah. And so are you saying that we should email the broader group of people, like the original group invited, and invite people to come into this, or just everybody who registered?
I'm thinking everybody who registered.
Okay,
we can, if we know people, we can say y'all come, but I wouldn't. I
Okay,
think
great.
it's a little messier for us to have all brand new conversations with
Totally.
folks. I mean, anybody who finds us.
No, that's easy. I love that. We've been toying with like a little survey in the middle to sort of like guide the next thing, and that's great. I could keep it that simple. Like, what do you really want to focus on? What do you have questions about? Great.
You can do that, and I'm just encouraging us as others who touch a bunch of people to just say, this would be a great conversation for you to be in.
Totally. I love it. No problem. We love emails. I'm trying to get limited. So, all right. Thank you all so much.
All right.
Jen, I have a really specific
I'm staying
client
on.
question
Lay it
that
on
I'd
me.
like to run by you quickly after everyone
Yes.
signs off.
Yes.
Thanks.
Peace, gang.
Good night.
Bye, everyone.
Hey, Jack, will you stop the recording?